Making PDFs in Quarto is really easy, but making PDFs that look good in Quarto is really not easy. In our consulting work at Clarity Data Studio, we've been using types to make a lot of PDF reports. Types promises to be powerful and easy to learn. We do think it's powerful, but we don't think it's super easy to learn. So in this video, I'm going to walk through how you can make a highly stylized PDF report using Quarto and Typst. We recently worked with folks at the Johns Hopkins University International Vaccine Access Center to make a series of reports, one for each state, on childhood immunization. What you're looking at here is the report for Alabama, and you can see that it combines text alongside some charts. It also has some maps and some icons and other elements as well. So in this video, I'm going to create a lot of the content that you see in this report. Okay, I am in Positron. I've created a Quarto document called report.qmd. You can see I've got some SVGs. These are actually the charts and maps that I made. We actually made these in ggplot, but for simplicity, I just exported them and I'm going to use them here. I've added a bunch of the content. You can see text as well as, say, those SVG images. And let me go ahead and show you what it looks like to render using the approach that you might be likely to take when you first start out. Specifically, you might want to use format PDF. So I'm going to render this. Now, the thing with rendering with format PDF is it uses LaTeX to do that. So if I look over here at my preview, you can see the default output you get for LaTeX. Now, if you want to use Typst, you just need to switch format PDF to format Typst. The output looks pretty similar, nothing too different here. It's a slightly different font, but it's the same basic idea. So this is the default. If I want to make tweaks, the first way you might do this is using the YAML. So I can push that down, indent it 2 spaces, and then I can do things like add main font. I'm going to add a very obvious font. I'm going to use a keyboard shortcut to render this again, and you can see how it now uses Comic Sans throughout. You can make additional changes. So for example, you can do paper size. You can do, say, US letter. You can also set margins. Margin. So I could do X. Whoops, I need to do 2 spaces. X 2 inches and Y. No, I'll do 2 inches as well. All right, so I render that again. It'll become really obvious there. Now this works if you just want to make some simple changes, but if you want to do things like set different fonts for headings and paragraph text, you can't really do it with this approach. I'm going to take a detour for a second away from Quarto and to a tool called brand.yml. You're looking at the brand.yml website here. Brand.yml allows you to very easily create an _brand.yml file, add it to your project, and that will then handle a lot of the styling. Let me show you what this might look like. Okay, so I am going to put this back to the default, and I'm going to create a new file called _brand.yml. I'm going to actually copy in code that I've already written. So you can see now I'm specifying the typography. So for the base, that's going to be for paragraph text. It's going to use the font Lato, size 11 point. For headings, it's going to use a font called Bitter with a navy blue color, which is that hex code there. I'm going to render this again. And now you can see how our headings use that navy blue, use the Bitter font, while the text uses Lato. So brand.yml is great if you want to make some simple tweaks. But one thing I noticed, for example, if you look here, the header there, the heading vaccination coverage, which if I scroll down here, you can see it's a 2nd level heading. And there's a 3rd level heading. Unfortunately, I can't actually specify the size for each of those within brand.yml. We just specify the font family and the color. So because we need to make more specific tweaks, we're going to have to go away from brand.yml. Okay, so I am going to go in here. I'm going to delete brand.yml. Okay, now we are moving into what you probably came here for, which is making an entirely custom template with types. To do that, we are going to adjust our YAML. So we're going to say format types, and then we're going to specify that we need to use what are called template partials. These are files that are going to determine what shows up when we render using types. There are two files we're going to use. The first is typst-show.typ, and the second is typst-template.typ. These files do two separate things. The typst-show.typ is how we're going to connect data from Quarto, things like our title, our date, and pass those to our template file, which is this typst-template.typ. And that's how we're going to define things like text, header, footer, etc. Okay, so I've made a typst-show. I'm going to copy in my code here. I'm going to save this. And you can see that in this, I am using types code. So this syntax, what it's doing is it's telling types, hey, when you find variables in Quarto, pass them using a custom function that we're making called report, and pass those to types. So for example, the title, or actually the title, that's the title in our Quarto document, we'll create a variable called title that we can use in types. Same thing with date. And then we have body, which is just all of the rest of the content. So all of this stuff here, which will also be passed using this custom function in types. Next, we'll create a types-template file. So I'll go to new file, types-template.typ, and I'll paste in some content. So the types-template file is where we're going to define the template. Here, we're creating a new typed function called report. This let is how you define a function in types. In our function, then, we're going to have an argument for title, for date, and for content. And you can see that we add the content here. We haven't yet added the title, and we haven't yet added the date. And if I go back here and I render this again, watch what happens. You can see how it looks different at this point. It's not using the styling that we created with brand.yml. First, let's set our page properties. To do that, I'm going to go back into my types template file, and I'm going to paste in this. Set page paper US letter, so that's the paper size. Types has all sorts of built-in options, or you can actually specify height and width if you want. Then you can see I've got the margin, top, bottom, and X, which is on the left and right side. And I made that 2 inches just so it's really obvious. I'll render again, and you can see those big margins. Next, let me adjust some of the text. So for example, I'm thinking about headings. I'm thinking about paragraph text. So to do that, let me go in here first, and I'm going to adjust this to make a more reasonable 0.75 inches on the margin. Then I'll paste in this. This says set text. So this is what's known as a set rule in types, where I'm setting the properties for the text throughout my report using the text function. You can see I'm specifying the language as English, the region as US, font as Lato, and size 11 point. If I go back here and I render, you can see now that my report is using Lato font throughout, and the paragraph text is all 11 point. Now, one thing to note is that this code that we added has adjusted the heading text, made it a different font, but it's not making it 11 points. That's because if you want to target headings, we have to do something slightly different in our types-template file. So to adjust our headings, I'm going to paste in this code. This says show heading : set text. So this show rule allows us to focus on just one portion, in this case, the headings of our report. So then when I have set text, that's exactly the same as up above, except I'm setting some different options. I'm setting the font to be bitter. The color is specified with the fill property. That seems confusing to me. It seems like it should be color, whatever. Then we're using this specific hex code. If you're using a hex code, you have to say RGB around it. If it's a name color like red, for example, I could just put red. So I'm going to leave that. I'm going to set my size to be 20 point. Then I'm going to set the weight to be bold. I'm going to go back here and I'm going to render again. And now if you take a look at my headings here, vaccination coverage, proportion of 2-year-olds fully protected with DTaP vaccines, that is going to have these properties. So the code that I just showed will set the properties for all of your headings, but you probably want to set different properties for different levels of headings. For example, if you look at our report, you can see where it says vaccination coverage. That heading is bigger than the heading that says proportion of 2-year-olds fully protected with DTaP vaccines. There are a couple other differences. The vaccination coverage, that level of heading, is uppercase. And the proportion of 2-year-olds fully protected with DTaP vaccines is aligned in the center. Okay, to make these changes, I am going to delete this, and I'm going to actually paste in some code that I have written. Let me make this slightly wider so we can see it. So what you see here is what typst calls an unnamed function. This show heading looks familiar, but this syntax with the colon and then the it and this, that indicates that we're making a function. And we're doing that because we want to vary the properties of our headings. So here you can see I say let sizes 1:16 point and 2 10 point. So here what we're doing is we're saying let level equals str it.level. It is the parameter of our function. Basically, what this it.level does is it holds the level of our heading. And so we're just defining that as a variable called level. Then we're using that here to say let size equals sizes at, remember we defined sizes here, so sizes.atLevel basically gets the size. So for example, if it's a level 1 heading, it'll be 16 point. If it's level 2, it'll be 10 point. I'm going to come back to these two lines, but let's actually scroll down here. I set my properties here. I've got my font, my color. The size, though, is equal to the size which we define here. Next, we need to format our headings. So we say let format heading equals, if it's a level 2 heading, then just keep it as is. Otherwise, so in other words, if it's a level 1 heading, we're going to use the upper function to make it uppercase. Same thing with alignment. We say let alignment equal if it's level 2, then center it, otherwise make it left. Then this syntax here, we use the align function using the value from alignment, either center or left, and apply that to the formatted heading which we defined here. So I'm going to go back here and I'm going to render again. I'll pull this over slightly. So you can see now we've got vaccination coverage there, and we've got proportion of 2-year-olds fully protected with DTaP vaccines there. Now, one thing you might be confused by, if I scroll down here, you see we have vaccination coverage, and that's actually a second level heading. This is a third level heading, and that's confusing here because here we were talking about a first level heading and a second level heading. The reason you have this discrepancy is that when you render a Quarto document, it actually takes all of the headings and bumps them up one level. So a second level heading becomes a first level heading, a third level heading becomes a second level heading, etc. There are ways to adjust this if you need to. For the most part, we don't really do that. We just deal with it knowing that they're going to be adjusted. The next thing we want to do is add content to the footer of our report. If you look at the report here, you can see how there is a light blue section on the bottom. It's got the title of the report on the left side and the date on the right side. Let's add this now to our report. So to do this, we're actually going to go up to where we defined our page, because this is something that's going to apply to all of the pages. I'm going to paste in code here. What you're going to see is this is using the footer argument of the page function. Then within that, I'm using the rect function to make a rectangle. We specify its width, its height, outset. Actually, let me delete outset and I'll show you why we need it. And then we set the fill, which is this light blue. Okay, I'm going to render this again, and you can see now we have that added in our footer. Now you're going to notice it only goes here to the edge of where the text shows up. So the reason we had that outset is that specifies, hey, types, when you make this, make it go to the actual edge of the page, not the edge of the text. I'll render this again, and there you can see how it goes all the way. Okay, let's add some content now. So I'm going to go back into my typst template, and we need to actually add content within the footer. So again, I'm working within the footer argument, and I'm going to paste in some content here. Let's look at what this does. So first, it's using the block function to say we're creating kind of a block of content. Then we're using the grid function, and we're specifying that we want to have it have two columns. The first column, the content, is here. We're saying align this left. It's going to be the text, which is going to be upper title. So in other words, take the title and make it into uppercase. You can see we're setting properties using bitter font, white color, and it's bold. On the right side, we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to use the date. So let me go back here and render. Okay, so you can see we have our text here. There are a couple issues. The padding is off. It's like way on the top of the footer. And the formatting of our date isn't right. Let's first deal with the padding. So to deal with the padding, we're actually going to go back up here, and we're going to wrap this in the pad function. So I'm going to wrap it there. And then let me see if I can get the right place. I think I need to add another parentheses there. As you'll see, types has a lot of nested parentheses and brackets, all of that kind of thing. The pad function, as you can probably guess, adds padding. Here I'm saying add 16 points of padding. So let me go ahead and do that again. Now you can see how these are nicely positioned right in the center of the footer. Next, let's deal with that date. We don't want the date to show up as 2025-09-01. We'd like to have it say September 2025. So to deal with this, we actually don't even need to go into our types template. Instead, we're going to work in the YAML. There's an argument called date format, and I'm going to specify it like this. Tell it I want it to be the full text of the month and then the year. I'm going to render this again. And now you can see we've got September 2025. Oftentimes when we make reports, there's a cover page. This report doesn't actually have a separate cover page, but it does have things like the logo for the Johns Hopkins University International Vaccine Access Center, as well as the title and the flag for the state that we're making a report for. This is, of course, a parameterized report. I'm just showing one of these reports. And so I'll add the flag for Alabama. So looking at the report here, you can see what I'm talking about. We've got the logo here, here's the title, and here's the flag. Let's go ahead and make these in Positron. Okay, so I'm going to go to my types template file. Now at the bottom here, the last thing I have in this report function that I've created is content. That basically places all the content. Now, I want to just put like the logo before that. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to add it here. So I'm going to say image logo.png, and I can also specify a width. So I'll say 4 inches. You know what? I don't have the logo here. Let me add it in. Okay, I have added the logo here, which you can see. So now if I go back here and I render this, and I go back to the top, you can see we have our logo added. Next, we want to add the title. Remember how when we switched to types, the title no longer showed up at the top. That's because we actually have to add it in manually. So to add the title back in, I'm going to go below the image and I'm going to paste this. The text function will allow us to add the title, and we specify its properties as well. So now if I go here and I render, there we go. We've got the title. Now in the actual report, we've got the title on the left side and the flag on the right. So let's format our document so it has both of those elements. To do this, I'll go back into types template. I'm going to actually delete this. And instead, I'm going to add some content that first creates a grid. So similar to how we created a grid in our footer where we had 2 columns, we're going to do the same thing here. Here, we're actually going to have 3 columns. We're going to have one column that's 80%, one that's 15%, and one that's 5%. The 5% column is actually just going to be blank. It's just going to give us a little padding. In the 80% column, which is here, we're going to add the title. Then we use align right, and we use that image, and we say that should be flag.svg, which is a flag of Alabama. And then we just have this, which just has no content. So if I go back here and I render and go back up to the top, you can see we've got our title and our flag. Looking back at our report, you can see that there is a blue line above and below the title/flag section. And in fact, we use this blue line throughout. Adding these blue lines involves creating a custom typst function. Let me show you how this works. To make a custom function, I'm going to go back up to the top here, actually outside of our report function, and I'm going to paste this. I'll move this over just a little bit. We're defining a function called blueLine, which is a line of length 100, stroke 2 points, and then the color, which is that light blue. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll down here, and I want to put this before that grid. So I'm going to say now we're going to add blueLine there, and it also shows up below that grid. So now, if I go here, you can see we've got that blue line added. Now, if you look at the report, there's also a blue line right above vaccination coverage. In fact, we use this blue line throughout the report. Let me show you how you can also add this into your Quarto document in specific places where you want to add this blue line. Okay, so to add your blue line, I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to find the place where I want to do that, which is here. I'm going to add a new code chunk. Normally, I do it like that. I add R. But here, I'm going to actually say typst. And we're actually going to put equals types, which will tell Quarto, just treat this as raw typst code. Then I'm going to do hash blueLine. Having this hash here actually tells types to treat this as code. Let me go ahead and run this and show you what happens. You can see now we have our blue line added. Now, if I don't have that hash and I try and run this again, it's just going to treat it as text blue line. So that's why we have to have that hash. Adding that blue line was relatively straightforward. It's a pretty simple types function. Let me show you a slightly more complicated one. If you take a look at the report, see where it says source child vax view. That is basically source text for whenever we are reporting on some particular piece of data. So to add that, we're going to create another custom function. I'm going to go up to the top here. I'm going to paste this in. And I'm going to say let source text. And you can see here our blue line function did not have any arguments, but our source text function does. Specifically, it has source info. And it will take whatever source info you give it. It will align it right. It will make it bitter font, 9-point, italic. So to use this, I'm going to go back here and I'm going to create another typst code chunk. And I'm going to say source child vax view. But I need to use the function that I just created. So I'm saying source text, source child vax view. I'll render this and bring this over. I actually have to scroll down because it's showing up now on the second page, but you can see it there on the right side in italics. Okay, so blueLine was a very simple function. Source text was a slightly more complicated function. Let me show you an even more complicated types function that we can create. Throughout our report, we have what we call status boxes. If you look over at the universal vaccine purchasing section, you can see where it says universal purchaser, no. We also use these in the vaccination exemption section where we have 4 of them. So to make our status boxes, again, we're going to go to typst template, and I've pasted in my code. If we think about what the status box involves, it's got a top section that's a dark blue, and then some text in it, and then a bottom section with a white background, and again, some text in it. So looking at our function called status box, we have to give it 2 arguments, top box text and bottom box text. Then within the function, we say let top box equal, and we use the box function. Here I'm giving it a width of 2 inches, a height of 0.7 inches. You can see the other properties. We're using a little bit of inset just to give it a little padding. We're setting the alignment, and then we're basically adding the top box text, which is going to be blank by default, but we're going to add some. We do something similar to create the bottom box, except here the fill is white. The color of the text is going to be black. Then we use the stack function to stack the top box right on top of the bottom box. Okay, so to add this, let me scroll down to the universal vaccine purchasing section. And right here, I'm going to paste this in. Again, I'm making a typst code chunk. And you can see then I'm saying status box where top box text is universal purchaser, bottom box text is no. I'm going to render this, and you can see that we have our box here. There's one last element that I want to show you, and it allows me to highlight something interesting about using types, which is that you can actually throw in a little bit of HTML and CSS, and Quarto will actually convert it to types code for you. So if you look at our reports, you can see that we have these gray boxes in these sections. For example, here where it says proportion of 2-year-olds fully protected with DTaP vaccines, you can see how we use them throughout. I'm in the Quarto document now, and I'm going to show you how we add these. So I've scrolled down here and I found proportion of 2-year-olds fully protected with DTaP vaccine. I'm going to add just a little bit of HTML here, creating what's called a div, which is basically just like a section. And you can see within my div, I'm specifying the background color with just a little bit of CSS. I'll render this. If I scroll back up, you can see now our section has that gray background. Now in the actual report, you can see that we actually lay out the charts in 2 columns. So let me show you how you can do that. So the simplest way to do this is to add 3 colons and then layout endcall equals 2 like that. And then we also add 3 colons here. This is basically the same as creating a div. It's just creating a section. But we're using the Quarto layout syntax that allows us to create columns. So now, if I render this again, you can see how we've put our charts into 2 columns. Now, there's still some additional tweaks I'd make, like that title needs a little space above it. Probably want a little space here. But this video's gone on long enough, so I think I'll leave it there for now. I want to leave you with a few tips for working with Typst in Positron. It can be a little confusing when you're first starting out, but there are 3 extensions that I think can really help you. If you're not familiar with Positron extensions, you click on this little button and you see these extensions. Think of these kind of like packages in R. They basically allow you to do certain things. In this case, working directly in Positron. You can see here the extensions that I have installed. The first one I'm going to recommend is this. It's called Typst LSP. It allows you to have syntax highlighting, error reporting, code completion, etc. So for example, when I'm here and let me go over the page function, you can see it gives me all of those options for using the page function. And for example, if I have that, you can see how it's underlining things, telling me, hey, your syntax is off. So that's really helpful. There's also an extension called TinyMist Typst. This basically allows you to automatically format your code. So for example, if I were to go like that, when I save it, it will automatically format it and make it look nice and just a lot easier to read. The other extension is this called VS Code PDF. If you're wondering why it's called VS Code, it's because Positron is a fork of the code editor called VS Code. Most extensions that work in VS Code also work in Positron. And so what it allows you to do is you can see, for example, the rendered PDF, and you can open it directly in Positron without having to open up Preview or some other tool. I've mostly been working in just this local preview here that Positron gives you. But if you want to confirm and see the actual PDF, that is a great extension for doing that. That concludes our overview of how to make high-quality PDFs with Quarto and Typst. Good luck making your own reports in Typst. And if you ever want help in that, feel free to reach out to our consulting arm, Clarity Data Studio, at claritydatastudio.com.